Well, we're here. I'm Bob Moats. Welcome to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Weemuth, welcoming you to Episode 6, How Winning Programs Scout and Select, Recruit and Transfer Scouting, Player Selection, and Coaching Hires. Recorded on the evening of February 28th, 2024. So, Bob, did you notice our little duo is a trio today?
Did somebody get the code again? I mean, wait, no, hell, it's Sam. We talked about doing this. So,
Yeah.
the great Samuel story is in the X's and Joe's episode 6.
Yeah.
I can't remember when I first actually started talking to Sam via DM on Twitter, but I remember when I jumped on Peegs in 2019 after taking a bit of a hiatus. Mike told me somebody you got to pay attention to when he says something is Sam's story. And the more I kind of looked at him, followed him on Twitter, it's like, I mean, I'm just intrigued by this guy. And so we threw out some basketball content. We started talking, and before you knew it, we're calling each other, we're Zooming, and we're doing all sorts of fun things through the COVID and everything else. So I'm thrilled. I'm like a kid at Christmas seeing Sam here on this on our podcast.
Yeah, I think Bob, last week I described Sam to others as a mix between Trilly Donovan and David Gergen.
Yeah.
He's kind of a man of mystery, and yet he seems to know everybody. So he's a well-known player within the IU fan community.
The Godfather. The man is the Godfather, and we're pleased and we're privileged to have the Godfather here tonight. Referee extraordinaire now too, right, Sam?
It is. Thank you both for the introduction. Very nice of you to say, but you also shouldn't feel threatened that I won't be sending the cash payments for the invoices you sent for the presidency and vice presidency of the Sam Story Fan Club. But I do appreciate it. Referee extraordinaire, which is probably why most of my body is in consummate pain. I do football, basketball, and lacrosse. And the basketball season, certainly here in Illinois, is wrapping up. And it's been a lot. And I'll be very happy when it's over. And, just like you guys said, the pod, it is fun to do it. I've never done one before. There's very few areas of expertise I have, and certainly Indiana University basketball is not one of them. But it'll be fun to mess around, talk about some things, because I certainly have strong opinions about a number of things related to the college basketball landscape, the recruiting landscape, and certainly Indiana University basketball, and how we're currently in the midst of another season where I am in self-crippling isolation because of the on-court performances, but that's life.
It's why we have each other. It's why we all have each other. And for those of you joining us live, you're part of maybe the largest support group going on right now to try to figure out not just where we are, but how we get out of this place. And that's pretty much what Mike and I have been doing together since 1996.
Yeah, about
and it's been one of those it's been one of those things where it's just been a fascinating. It'll be fun when we get to the promised land. It's going to be fun. When we make it to the mountaintop, it's going to be fun.
Yeah. We do welcome the AC chat community to this pod. This is the first time Bob and I have gone live, so this should be a little bit of a fun experiment for both of us. And we'll try to take some questions at the end. So please, feel free to keep chatting during the festivities, and like I said, we'll try to get to some questions for Sam at the end of the fun. And we will try to do our best to keep this conversation on task, as our chats between the three of us tend to take a few wide detours from time to time. So
more so than Mike and me usual. That's a great thing.
Exactly.
It's like it's like So now we got a 3-top at the Denny's.
Yeah.
So, but before
go ahead.
No. You got your thought for him. Go for it.
I was just texting one of our mutual friends last night. I said to him that if you gave a room full of Pentecostal preachers a dose of amphetamines, that they'd probably have a much more disciplined conversation than what the three of us are about to have right now.
Speaking of discipline, we do want to make sure we give a shout out to the sponsor of the Back Home Net, one of the sponsors of the Back Home Network, Home Field Apparel, who are, if you're watching, I mean, all of us are watching Big Ten, and even I think they're making the Peacock ads too. We're seeing TV ads with Home Field, and it's that moment where we feel like we're on the cusp. This community has been on the cusp of something great for a long time. It's the best, it's not really a secret, but now it's going to be one of those things where a lot more people are going to know where this is. And we've talked a lot about the designs, but I mean, you talk about a T-shirt or a sweatshirt that just feels good, just feels soft, like you're in a Snuggie while you're sitting there watching a game. I give you Home Field. I mean, so it's not just high quality design; it's high quality comfort. So I'm a big fan of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I know, Mike, you are too. And Sam, I know you are as well.
Yeah, if it was socially acceptable, I would wear my gray Bison hoodie every day. Somebody might see me and say, "You were wearing that the last time I saw you." But if it's your wife who sees you every day, there could be some concerns. Unbelievable stuff they make, and I'm sure I'll only pick up more of it through the years.
Absolutely. Yeah, within our little fun group, we have no hesitation in using the threat of peer pressure or social comparison to highlight how awesome home field gear is. So if you want to hang out with the cool kids like us, then you definitely need to buy a hoodie or a bomber jacket from Home Field to separate yourself from the common crowd.
That's right.
As a great man said recently to me, never apologize for feeling fancy.
Yeah, I like that one. Yeah, from an IU standpoint, I do like the Bison mascot hoodie and the new Hyper crew neck they have. So it's I think it's really cool how they very specifically tailor their new offerings to the alumni specifically for every school. So that's awesome.
Hey. And for what I'm gathering, the movement towards bringing the Bison back has now even hit student athletic board. So yeah, Matt Riemann, who's running the thing, he's a Columbus kid who put 8 on me across the street a few years ago, and his brother played for me. He's doing a great job as student athletic board president, and his mom goes, they're wanting to bring some sort of mascot back. Oh yeah, the Bison, he's on that. Awesome. Have him call me. I mean, whatever I can do to help. I mean, because I think it's not just going to be a past thing. These future kids are going to kind of buy into this too. So
that's awesome.
Check out Home Field at www.homefieldapparel.com and see what they've got going. All right, well, let's get started, gentlemen. I'm thinking at this point we're going to talk a little bit about the traits of college coaches and also the recruiting evaluators, what they're looking at with the prospective players out there, playing grassroots. We used to call it AAU, travel ball, whatever you want to call it, or, beating the bushes in high schools. And what's that information that the common fan should be really paying attention to versus the noise in the conversation? So I guess what are they what are people looking for? What are those traits? What are the things that what are the things that are out there?
I certainly think now that I think we're really in the midst of the college game. The last few years, it has started to change a bit more. And I'm not saying it's quite at the NBA level where you've probably seen those images on Twitter and other places where it was an NBA shot chart from 1988 and an NBA shot chart from 2021 or 2022. We're not quite there with the college game, but what you really have started to see is when guys go to watch high school players, basically they need to possess basically one of 3 things, and the more the merrier. One is size. We're still at a point where the real value for a high major college basketball player is a 6'5" to 6'8", 6'9" wing. And even as teams start to play smaller, and we talk about small ball and 4 out and 5 out, that bigger, longer athlete will always have a home. Second is skill set. I think as we have talked about maybe some of the shift in college basketball, it used to be, I needed I needed we might call it a 3-tool player, a guy that can dribble, a guy that can shoot, or a guy that can pass. I think now we're seeing more of an impetus to attack those high school players, or I guess you'd say college and portal players, who have the ability to get to the rim. Because where the sport is right now, in my opinion, that long range bomber, Matt Roth, who I never ever thought would miss, but he did. I think his value isn't as high as maybe it would have been in 1995, even though this might be the opposite of what we're talking about. A player like that, who's more of a one-dimensional offensive player, his actual kind of peak role is being partnered and being played with these slashing 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" guys. And then probably the last thing besides the skill set and the size is just the athlete. You always want to take a chance on the athlete. And even as Indiana fans, Victor Oladipo, who obviously ended up being an outstanding player, his freshman year, he was no good, but he still had the athleticism that was just undeniable. And then we saw it again with OG Anunoby, a pair of guys who terrific athletes, but they needed refinement. But you will almost always have college coaches. They will take a chance on an athlete because if they come good, it's a total game changer on both ends of the floor. And I remember because a lot of I followed Kansas very closely only because probably just sheer jealousy and envy that their fans get to tune in every night and see this kind of fun, fluid offense littered with these kind of off-ball athletes. Ochai Agbaji was a kid from Kansas City, not heavily recruited. Kansas took him way late on a flyer after he had a huge senior year. When they won the national championship a few years ago, I mean, him and Christian Braun were just awesome. But, that guy from day one, just referencing Victor and guys like OG Anunoby, the guy they were from day one and the guy they were in day 700 were night and day. And some guys, the player they are from day one is the same player they are in day 700. And sometimes that's okay because you know what you're going to get from day one. And if you have that consistency, that's fine. But if we talk about like high impact winning, I think it is that athleticism that has really started to show itself because of the value of being able to drive the basketball. So I think when you look at traits, a lot of teams are looking for kind of that size, athleticism, and skill set. But then you'll sometimes have staffs, Virginia really comes to mind, where I think one of the first things they really want to evaluate is, one, do you have any interest in playing in this kind of style? And two, how can this guy impact the game on defense? Because they've had some just incredible defensive players. But it seems like there's more of an interest to kind of evaluate a little bit differently there than maybe you would see just at a lot of AAU events, whether a kid's playing on the EYBL circuit with Nike, Adidas, or Under Armour. A lot of guys, when they go there, they're going to watch a lot of guys go up against a lot of very high-level players, and it's like, I just want to see who's the prettiest girl to dance. Like, who is the best one, and that's the guy we want. And he may not have everything you're looking for, but there's enough there to know that's the ticket, and that's the guy we want.
And you bring up Virginia. Tony Bennett brings an interesting dynamic to the table also because he has a very strong faith-based approach to his coaching. And he brings guys in and works, basically that's part of his. I wouldn't call it pitch because it's legitimate. It's genuine. It's a part of who he is, and that's part of that program where you're looking at certain players. And we've talked about this before. Mike and I have on the pod, and with the three of us have talked about this with various people. You're looking for a fit for your program. And so he knows the player he's looking for, and he knows the player that he's looking for that's going to elevate that team to the level he needs to play at, not only to win the ACC, but to be successful in March. I tell the kids all the time, like when we do tryouts, the first thing I'm looking for are your basketball skills. Do you have skill? Can you shoot? Can you dribble? Can you pass? Like we were talking about. Are you that type of? Do you have you put the discipline in to do things properly? But the second thing I look for is raw, because I can't teach you to be big, and I certainly can't teach you to be fast. And if you're 6 foot in the sixth grade, I'm looking at you. Even if you're as long as you're not tripping over your own feet, if you can run down the floor, I can do something with you. I can teach you how to do a few things and maybe get you to the next level where in middle school they can teach you a little more. Because I'm looking at this from at 12, what are you going to be at 15 or 16? Not necessarily am I going to win titles at in the elementary school circuit in Columbus, Indiana. And obviously, and you also want to look for kids who are coachable. I mean, that's at the end of the day, you got to have kids who who fit into that. So, but that athleticism portion, I think, that's the canvas, right? I mean, wouldn't you guys agree that's the canvas that you kind of start with here? That if you have length and athleticism, this game might be for you.
Yeah, it's a lot. I think you see a lot of the better players that, let's say, make the biggest jump from where they are in, let's say, the senior year in high school to sophomore, junior year in college. It's oftentimes those guys that have, like what Sam described, sort of that baseline level of length and athleticism, but maybe they're just a little bit off in terms of, let's say, their ball skills or shooting, and then that develops later. Obviously, for Indiana fans, they saw a pretty good example of that in, around 2011, 12, and 13 with what happened with Oladipo. I mean, I can tell you there's at least one person I talked to in the DC area that, had a great observation about Oladipo. He said, yeah, he'll be a great defender in college if he doesn't develop a jump shot and just everything stays the same. And I asked him, well, what if he does develop a little bit of a jump shot and a little bit of a ball handling? Oh, he'll be a first rounder. And so that's like we get such a wide range of potential improvement just based upon that high baseline of physicality and athleticism, and just add a little bit of an improvement in skill set, and then you're on your way.
That reminds me a bit of a story I heard. So Porter Moser is now the coach at Oklahoma. Obviously, he was at Loyola Chicago for a few years. When he was coaching at Loyola, that had coincided with the time I was helping out an AAU program. And I had once asked him, how do you go about, who you offer or who you target? And something he said that I always remember was, and you were talking about that jump from senior year to that freshman or sophomore year. He said, if we think a kid will be in the rotation, so in our top 8, by the time he's a sophomore, we pull the trigger.
Okay. And
part of that reasoning is when a kid is a freshman in college, and this has nothing to do with basketball, just in general, when a kid is living away from home and he's in charge of his own decisions, the freshman year can be, a grab bag. Anything can happen. And for a college basketball player, practice that is very demanding every day, scouting reports you need to understand, the academic side, which isn't as important as it used to be, but then the travel side, the game side, and then the mental side of, you killed people in high school. You were awesome. Mm-hmm. And now we're going to get you in there for a few minutes and kind of see where it's at. So a freshman year, for some people, can kind of be disregarded is not the right word, but it can be looked past a bit if they still have this faith that, okay, through those bumps and bruises, will he be in the top 8 when he's a sophomore? And we offer it. Yeah. And I thought that was a really interesting way to look at things, because we can basically excuse a bit of the freshman year because all of those failures that he's going to go through are going to have him ready when he's a sophomore. Because obviously it would be like this for every player, but you basically have a kid who's not quite ready as a freshman. He's in the rotation as a sophomore, probably starting as a junior, and then maybe like a top 3 kind of guy as a senior. And that is what is kind of a normal, on paper, a normal trajectory, especially for high major basketball. But obviously now, and not to get off the topic, with the transfer portal, the one-time transfer rule, things can change a lot, because a lot of staffs, Arkansas, they can scrap development. They don't really have an interest in that. It's like, I will just pick a new top 8 every year.
But back in the 1980s, this is, I always thought the transfer portal was going to look a lot like free agency did in baseball. And in the 1980s, the New York Yankees decided we don't need to worry about the Columbus Clippers as much as we used to. In fact, it's just kind of a dumping ground. We're used as a landfill or a place to rehab an injured dude. And they just went in heavy into the free agency market. So Steinbrenner would just whip out the checkbook, write a check, go get Davy Collins and think he's going to be a first baseman. Well, Davy Collins was like a 5'9" center fielder because he wanted to steal bases. And so we're going to be the Bronx Burners instead of the Bronx Bombers in the early 80s. And so he goes and he kept trying to buy teams and just assemble talent and not build in this area where you're developing your own guys. Well, once he got suspended from baseball for a while, and they got some guys that knew what the hell they were doing, it became a thing where we're going to use free agents and trades to supplement guys like Derek Jeter, Bernie Williams, Rivera, these guys that we're going to grow on our own and leave them in as linchpins to this franchise. And surprise, they were back to being the New York Yankees that everyone hated, as as our grandfathers and fathers hated the New York Yankees for a reason. That was why. Yeah. And you see this with programs now, like Arkansas. Yeah, you can see why they're going to have struggles at this point, because every year it's kind of like it's a grab bag. We're seeing this at Indiana to a certain degree. It's like we're trying to gram some ground pegs into some square holes. We're trying to figure out what's going on out here with with basically 3 stretch 4s basically playing at the same time. And the true 4 is actually more the post player. So you kind of look at this from that vantage point, and it's interesting to see how programs are going to continue to utilize the portal. And I think the ones that are successful are the ones, and we've talked about this, but the ones that are using it to plug a hole. Like if you need that 6'5" wing and you don't think you have him, like that kid that freshman who doesn't crack the top 8. Because you're going to be wrong on some kids. You have a roster of 13. You're going to be wrong on guys. We're going to get to that too. But that kid's not going. You may have to go get somebody. And you may be more like, well, if I get a freshman, I'm going to have to wait a year. But if I go get a junior or a senior, if I go get Ray J. Dennis, I've got a kid that can produce now versus somebody I got to wait for. And that kind of goes into this, and we're going to get, again, that ranking process too, because the rankers oftentimes miss those guys, but it's not because the rankers did something wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Ray J. Dennis is a great example of, he's a kid who, we'll just highlight him a little bit. He grew up here, about 25 minutes from where we live. Good senior year, but you could just watch him and it's like, handle's got to get tighter, needs to know where the weight room is. Went to Boise State. Still, they had a good season. He was kind of like a 7th, 8th, 9th kind of guy. Came back. There were still guys in front of him. Goes to the MAC. So basically, he didn't really develop, but he was still sort of improving. Crushed it in the MAC. And then when he went into the portal, it was like, okay, regardless of his first 2 years, in the very short term, we saw a guy that produced, maybe not at this level, but we'll take a chance on him. And there was a lot of schools interested in Ray J. And obviously, I like him. I didn't think he'd do this well at Baylor. But a team like Baylor couldn't take a chance on him that freshman year. Like right. He's a great portal example. That guy needs to go develop elsewhere, and then we'll come take him, which is one of the big differences from where the sport is now versus where it was 15, 20 years ago. You think about
5 years. Hell, 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. Some of the really good players Indiana's had. If I asked a common Indiana fan, tell me about Victor Oladipo's freshman year, they'd be like, don't know much about it. Was he awesome? They'd be asking more questions than having answers. No, he wasn't awesome. But then he got awesome. So anyway, I know, Mike, you had asked, or Bob, you had asked on the question, like, what information should fans be looking at? And I think this is something, I know that the three of us have had this conversation many times. I I was never a big rankings kind of guy because when I was at AU events, I would get to know some of the guys who did the rankings, and there wasn't a big history in the sport of basketball. It's not trying to be unfair to them. I think it's more just a recollection of facts. There was a big history of being at AU events. No question on that. And zero question that a lot of these guys knew everybody, knew every coach, every assistant, knew every high school coach. Oh, this guy coached that guy. I was never huge on the people in charge of doing the rankings. So, unfairly or not, a lot of times I would disregard some of the rankings. Or I would tell myself, that is easy to see. One summer we played Anthony Davis's AAU team, Mean Streets of Chicago.
Yeah.
We played him 4 times. And when people said he's the best player in the country, I thought, you don't say. Because, I mean, there's like nothing he couldn't do.
With guard skills and all that. Yeah.
Like long, I mean, if you shot it anywhere in half court, there was a chance of it getting swatted, like Kalel.
Yeah.
So I think rankings are important foundationally as a baseline. But I think over time, and this is where guys who do rankings, who work for services or work for websites, when you get alerted or made aware of who coaches are watching, I think that is about as instructive as it gets, because you only get so many live periods to watch guys. They're valuable, so you're not going to waste it. So if you have a kid ranked first or at 1,000th, and you've got coaches at Arizona, Houston, Maryland, watching the kid who's 1,000th, and coaches from Central Arkansas, Texas State, and Cal Poly, watching the kid who's ranked number 1, I would be a little more interested in the kid who's ranked 1,000th on the base that I think college coaches know more about basketball than ranker guys.
And I would also just say, these guys travel together. It's kind of like a clown. It's kind of like a traveling circus, and they're all at Peach Jam, or they're all here. And back in the old days, when it was the old AAU circuits, hang out at the Bloomington Sportsplex or Spiece, or then the Field House up in Indy, or even the one up and around Chicago. Assistants get to know each other quite well in the college level because they never know who they're going to be working with in a year or two. Yeah. In a field where 80% of your people have been on the job less than 10 years as head coaches, assistants move around a great deal. So you never really know. You want to keep your Rolodex going. You want to keep your contacts rolling. What are you hearing? What do you know? These guys all have guys in the high school programs that they're talking to. And then they got, again, guys who are working for the services that are out there, and they're all talking to each other. Everyone's looking to kind of exchange information. So you look at a situation like Kyle Filipowski is a great example of this too, I think, where he just kind of shot up. And a lot of it, I think, had to do with Duke saw some things, Indiana saw some things, other programs were looking at this kid going, he's not your typical 6'9", 6'10" guy that has a stroke. He can do a little more than just shoot it like Bill Laimbeer. He's got something going. And you kind of saw that climb up, and I think that, again, these are not mutually exclusive. The offers, rankings, the looks, and the rankings aren't really mutually exclusive. I'm not going to say it's collaborative, but at the very least, it's influential on each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, Sam, you look at it the right way, and this is something that, even though people sometimes accuse me of being like some kind of like a servile lick spittle for the rankers, I always tell people that, in the work I do, the correlations between rankings and performance across college basketball history over time is obviously undeniable. I mean, all the charts and stuff that we go over and hear on X's and Joe's. But that's more like the macro value of rankings at a 30,000 foot level. At a micro individual level, like what you're talking about when you go to to an event to see like an individual player, I won't say rankings are useless, but they're just one tiny data point in a host of larger considerations like what you talk about. And yeah, I'm with you. If I see a lot of the elite coaches flocking over to one kid, I don't care what their ranking is. And frankly, a lot of the times you see at those camp events, those kids that are ranked like 150 and blow up, and then all of a sudden the Dukes and Carolinas look at them. They're ranked 150 at that moment.
Right.
The next update in another week or two or three, they probably aren't going to be ranked 150. They're probably going to be going up. So again, I think you're right. It's like you have to look almost like Doppler radar. You have to use all this like little data points of information. Maybe the rankings are general area. Yeah, what coaches are looking at them. Yeah, like what is their trajectory from where they were, like a year or two ago. And what do people say about them? What's the actual scouting report on them by the locals? Like, who do the locals think is like the best in their area? Does that guy stack up well against some of the other ones that they've seen over the course of 5-7 years? So yeah, it is a full portfolio analysis of the players, not just taking like a look at one number next to a kid's name.
I would defend the rankers in that if there was ever a time where we had, let's just call it the 200 best high school players in a class, if they were all in the same place at the same time, I think it'd be a lot easier to start going through this. This doesn't mean I'm trying to offer up business decisions of what Adidas, Under Armour, and Nike should do with their money. But when you have 3 shoe circuits, in each of those live weekends, there's events in Florida, Texas, and Utah for the 3 different shoe companies. It gets difficult to watch a kid here and try and project how he might compare to this kid, or how would he do in this setting. But because if they were all in one place, I think the rankings would be even better. But it's probably like buying a Powerball ticket and be like, well, I'll probably win it this time, so it's fine. Yeah. It's not. It'll probably never happen.
No, but you are right, Sam. Once they started doing the rankings back in like '84, they didn't have like the camps going on at that time, or at least they weren't popular. And the rankings were way off. They like get a little bit right at the top, but they generally were kind of scattered all over the place. Once night camp and ABCD and everything started taking off and becoming real popular, all those kids started getting actual exposure against each other. Then the rankings actually started to really jump up in terms of their actual predictive accuracy. So you're right, getting as many kids exposed to each other is the key.
And we've seen, again, since the mid-'80s, we've seen really amateur basketball go to more of a national sort of, it's a national marketplace now. I mean, I remember doing Municipal Gardens in 2002, and I'm coaching a 4th grade team, and the team from Baltimore, Maryland flew in with their older brothers to play us. I mean, they beat the crap out of us, 36-4. The other coach, my point guard fouls out in the third quarter, the first minute of the third quarter. He's like, put him back in. It's fine. You guys got to get back. Well, you got to get something out of this game. We got to get something out of this game. And you're nothing if you can't put this kid back in. And these kids walking around these again gyms, 10 years old with Nike bags and all the swag decked out head to toe. And it was eye-opening when you're, in your mid-20s and you first start coaching. You're like, wow, this is something a little different. So again, as we kind of move into this, we're going to take a little break here. We're going to come into that next segment. We're going to talk about kind of the stages and levels of recruitment, like what it actually looks like. And how does it translate not just to players, but also coaches, because they get recruited too, and even athletic administration who gets recruited. So when we go back from the break here, we'll talk about that.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Weemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats and our friend Sam Story. So, gents, we've covered what programs are looking for in players. So let's maybe delve into the actual process a bit. I think most fans understand the end phases of the recruiting process, like, the announcement. But Sam, maybe help us understand how the process looks from maybe the start and through the proverbial hat ceremony, where the kid is actually, heading to their final destination.
Yes. So just like a lot of high school sports, a guy or girl kind of comes on the scene at some point. Sometimes maybe it's a freshman on varsity. Other times, maybe, a girl hit a growth spurt her junior year. In her senior year of soccer, she's like just an absolute freight train. But at some point, a player kind of comes on the scene. So we'll call that, I guess, the first introduction. Maybe there was an article written in the newspaper, or maybe a travel coach or a high school coach had reached out to a college coach saying, we got this kid, we started to do this, maybe worth a look. And just like anything in recruiting, a lot of it, we hear a lot more like, man, this is who Indiana's recruiting. Recruiting is also a two-way street. Like we could have the greatest ever high school player in Indianapolis, but there has to be two-way interest. So one of the first things you want to establish is this going to be worth my time? Mm-hmm. So really you want the kid to show up to your school for an unofficial visit. Because on an unofficial visit, they're paying their own way. Now, if the world's greatest high school basketball player is in Indy and he's visiting Bloomington, they don't have to refinance their house to get down there. But you want there to be interest on both sides. Because if you don't have that, it's going to go nowhere. There was a famous story after he'd gotten into the NBA, because Kawhi Leonard was the quintessential tweener high school player, wasn't on a lot of recruiting boards, and kind of after he'd blown up, where San Diego State had done all this work, he got this novel of a text message from a Pac-12 coach. Here's where we are, here's what we represent. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of words, and he texted back, nah. So there was no two-way interest. So it would have made no sense for whatever that staff was, Cal or Stanford, whoever, to continue. So now, a kid has kind of come on the scene. If he shows up to campus, that's a great thing. It's like, okay, this is theoretically a possibility down the line that we could have some sort of marriage here. And then the third thing really is a staff evaluation, because there's no issue with having a kid that's not really on your radar come visit for a home game. Like if Indiana plays Bethune-Cookman at home, they're going to have a lot of spare tickets. So if a recruit wants to come check it out, sure, we'll see here. And then probably that staff, I'd say the third thing is probably that staff evaluation. Now, this can come from high school film where you miss a lot of things, or it can come from a high school game, or usually what occurs, a number of in-person evaluations at AAU events. Because as you know, we have the different times of year where guys can go watch players. We have April, July, they have a June high school period. So basically I'd say you have kind of the kid comes on the scene, maybe a visit is an unofficial is set up, or an evaluation can occur before an official visit. And then after that, after you've had the evaluation is when things start getting to, I guess, what we would call the fun parts. It's like, okay, we've seen you play. We like you. We've offered you. And now it's about the official visit. Now it is the red carpet. Now it's now we want to show off to campus. We want to talk about our NIL situation. We want to talk about our facilities. We want to talk about our cheerleaders. So the fun stuff, because on the official visit is really the big sales part. And at that point, it's really not all about the kid. It's about when Lee McNeely had his official visit to Indiana, his parents were there, but his grandparents were there too. So it wasn't all about, we want Lee McNeely to really love Indiana. We want them to also love Indiana because, as you know, there's a lot of people, every recruitment's different, but sometimes you can have recruitments where you really need to get a lot of people on your side of the fence. It's not as straightforward as just a player in question. And then the last time, closing time, I guess we'd say, is maybe the kid's taking an official, and this could maybe be flip-flopped with the official visit. You've made a visit to their house, and it's there's no other way to say it. We need this kid at our school. So I'd say those are kind of the 5 stages. There's kind of an introduction that a player is kind of showing a path of his or her own game. to become a Division I basketball player or Division II or III. Usually an unofficial visit, a live in-person evaluation. And sometimes, and certainly with the school, the bigger the school, the more this can happen. You might have an assistant who watches him 8 times, a head coach who watches him 6 times, another assistant who watches him 10 times. So you have a real clear understanding of what you think you're getting into. And then the official visit, and then sometimes, but not always, the in-home visit, and really that push for the commitment.
Kids notice who's at their games. I mean, they really know who's watching them, and they know who's recruiting them. And Miller Kopp said it, at the when he put out it was that long, I guess, list of things. The head coach isn't recruiting you. They're watching for that big guy in the chair, front and center, taking an eye on him, talking to him afterwards, giving a pointer or two, trying to coach him through certain things. And that's, I think, one of the big issues that, when we start looking at recruiting in general, is just the amount of time that staffs have to put in, which is where it goes back to the two-way interest. You always want low-hanging fruit, and everybody wants to be Kentucky, but even Kentucky has to work to get kids. Even Kentucky has to show interest. Like Calipari did go see Reed Shepherd play. He didn't just sit there and kind of say, "Well, son, you're a Kentucky kid, and obviously you grew up wearing a lot of blue and white. So I'll just sit back and wait for your offer, or wait for you to accept the offer we're giving you." Another one is that even sometimes when there is like one-way interest from a player to a program, I feel like that's an offsetting point for a kid. Like if you grew up a fan of a program and they're not reaching out to you, or they're dancing around there on level 1, level 2, but you're ready to take this to the next level. You're like, "Hey, look, that's nice. We're texting each other, but can you take me to dinner?" sort of thing. They're ready for that. They're ready to, maybe they're ready to, because they may be ready to commit because they grew up a fan of the program. And I mean, I look at an example of that as a guy you found, Sam, Braden Smith. There were some programs that I think he really wanted to be a part of and really wanted to get recruitments from. But somebody came in and said, "But I'm here for you now." Nigel Pack, kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
It's like you get in early, and again, the rankers oftentimes get a lot of things right when you really think about, when you look at the sweet spot stuff that Mike's done over the years. They get a lot right. But sometimes when they look at a kid who might be 5'11", 6 foot, and they're not sure if they're going to make that jump, or can they, or if those kids haven't had the opportunity to play against high-level talent, or they haven't seen them play against that high-level talent, because they're not in the gyms when they're working out. That's the other thing. They're not in the gyms when those kids are being trained. That's huge. I mean, you don't see them playing against potentially guys that are 2-3 years in college, because a lot of this now is being done. A lot of the training and practice, they're going to camps, yes. They're doing those things, yes. But they're spending a lot of time working on their games individually. And it's 2-on-1, 3-on-1, 4-on-1. And they're going against guys who are also Division I high major guys. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a thing.
2 things that popped into my head when you were going through that. Steve Zeller, Cody's dad, at one point had told Tom Crean, like, "You don't need to send that stuff in the mail. We don't need the envelope every day with the Indiana logo. Just show up to the games." He was like, "Yeah, job done." And then talking about the 2 interests, there's a kid right now who really likes Indiana and wants to be part of Indiana basketball, and Indiana's not really sold on him. And then that kind of leads to the question, like, okay, why? Why would they? A kid who's decently highly ranked, it's like, okay, why aren't they sold on him? And this probably circles to everything we're talking about, is there's not a lot of other people who are that interested either. Like a kid who's usually in that top 100, or, Mike has done a lot of that great work with the sweet spot. Usually those type of kids, you'd have people just banging on the door. Especially what I would now say is a bit later in the recruitment for a 2024 player. But yeah, the 2A interest is huge. And then like you said, Bob, sometimes we both had mentioned Nigel Pack because it had kind of come to the fore at the time. He was having a great year, at a great Marion County tournament, and Indiana and Purdue and Ohio State, Michigan and Michigan State were kind of we like him. We like him. We don't love him. And Bruce Weber was like, hey, they're waiting on you. I'm here. I think you're the man. I love you, and I want you to be here. And he went to Kansas State. And thinking back to, there was a team that knocked Indiana out of the NCAA tournament last year, and I could have sworn that Pack was in the game.
I think he was too.
Team, I think.
Weird how that works.
Well, so it's as you kind of look at that process. So again, you start thinking about levels too, like when a kid jumps and the programs of. I look something. Social media can be a kind of a double-edged sword. It's great when because we have all this information at our fingertips. I mean, I remember Mike going in, and it's almost like he had these publications that were done on a mimeograph that he was looking at back in the '90s.
I still have microfiche going back then. So.
Yeah, it's like and guys hawking their stuff at high school basketball games. And big credit to guys like Mike Pegram, who kind of just started putting it all online and creating communities as a result of it, and how that's continued and how it's kind of going throughout the entire game. But we look at the fact that at the same time, it's like, look, if you're going to launch a campaign, you're going to have certain sports writers writing you like you're the next coming of Jimmy Chitwood. And then you start getting these lead-ins like, well, there's the best kept secret in Indiana, or the best kept secret in Topeka, Kansas, is playing at Topeka Christian Barbers College or Topeka Christian High School and Barbers Academy, whatever. And he's scoring 74 points a game, and he can shoot the ball from the rafters, shoot the ball from the top row, and hits every time. Have you looked at this kid? And he'd look really good in a KU uniform. Yeah. And at this point, everyone's kind of looking at the kid at that point in time, and they're asking the question, who's talking to you? The people who evaluate talent, who see the kid, go, okay, that's great. You're doing this against the kid who's never played basketball before. And that's fair. But on the other side, college coaches are, you got a lot of you got some NAIA schools looking at you. You may have some D3 schools looking at you, or then that first D1 offer may pop up at some point, but it's not going to start off at KU.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting if you think about like the proliferation of all the recruiting sites that's happened over the last 15, 20 years. I think a lot of that actually drives a lot of those campaigns that we see now when it comes to these players, because now people across, not only just within a state, but in neighboring states, or the offer list for your particular school, you can find it in literally like 5 seconds, going on 24/7 or on 3. And so now everyone is aware, okay, my school's looking at this kid. Oh, wait a minute, why aren't they looking at that kid? 20 years ago, obviously, we had no idea. You look in the paper, oh, this school offered this one kid. You kind of maybe have the back of your head what the offer list is, but probably foggy, maybe not. And so I think that it is interesting how this has almost become sort of like a public forum, this whole concept of actually recruiting players, like who gets offered, who doesn't. And so not only what Sam's talking about, who is, whether a player is getting offered by a particular school, sometimes the difference is not even a conference isn't offering a school, a whole like division level isn't offering you. So now you have, fans will say, well, this one kid is scoring, 48 points, a game over at the 1A school. Why isn't, my team offering him? Well, because every D1 coach is also not offering him, not just your school's coach, but the D2 and D3 schools are offering them. Maybe those coaches know something about this kid that, the casual fan doesn't. So it's very, I think the popularization of recruiting information online has definitely kind of fostered some interesting debates that we never used to have back in the day.
We had a kid who a lot of people remember come through the state of Indiana a few years ago, named Luke Brown, who had an awesome high school career.
He did.
Now, they weren't playing 4A teams every night, but he was a one-man bomb squad out there. And you can still find on Twitter, you can still find these tweets. Mm-hmm. I don't know the people who wrote them, thankfully, I guess I'd say, of Luke Brown's name in a tweet with Archie Miller. And to me, I'm not trying to pick on the kid because I couldn't take away from the fact he scored 4 billion points in high school. It was that he is the quintessential example of what we would call stages or levels. He had a Ball State offer, right? He had an offer into the MAC. And then it was like Archie Miller has got to be at his game tonight, and he has to watch him. Because in the movie Hoosiers, I saw Jimmy Chitwood light it up. Mm-hmm. I saw Matt Roth hit a bunch of threes in an Indiana uniform. Like, he's got to be there. But the question, and this goes with ADs, coaches, players, the question at the time should not have been, why hasn't Indiana offered? After the Ball State offer, it should have been, why hasn't Indiana State, where are they? And then after that, where's Butler? Where's Cincinnati? Then after that, okay, now where is Ohio State, Purdue, Indiana, Michigan State, kind of those more regional Big Ten teams? It's not, where's the Indiana offer after Ball State? And we see it a lot. We see it a lot right now in football recruiting because actually the Big Ten can be the next stop if a kid has 8 offers from the MAC. It's not that way in college basketball. Like, a kid has an offer from everywhere in the MAC, then you can start to see the Northwestern, Purdue, Indiana, Illinois guys. In basketball, it is not, on signing day, he was deciding between Western Michigan and Kentucky. It's like, that's just really not how it goes. But we get those stages with players. And I think it's very similar with ADs. Just a quick example, two of the guys right now in the industry who are thought of as very good athletic directors. There's a guy named Gene Taylor, who's currently the athletic director at Kansas State. He didn't start at Kansas State, okay? He was at North Dakota State. Then he became the deputy athletic director at Iowa, and then went to Kansas State. But there probably weren't people in his second or third year at North Dakota State being like, Big 12 AD written all over him. It's like, maybe, but there are stages to this. Mac Rhodes, who's done a really good job at Baylor. I mean, he was at Akron. So again, like, the MAC level, he was there 3 years, went to Houston for 6, had a cup of coffee at Mizzou, been at Baylor, doing great. And then it goes to coaches. And I think I speak for all of us. I loved Michael Lewis. I love the guy. Jacob Jakes, you take that ball off the face.
Yeah.
And you've seen the posts and the tweets. Like, is he the next guy at IU? Let me tell you something. Todd Kowalczuk just finished 3 years where he was the regular season champion at the MAC at Toledo. You know what job he's being linked with? There's Toledo fans that want him fired because he had won the conference tournament. So if the guy who's won 3 straight MAC championships, admittedly the regular season, is being linked with Toledo, then somebody like Michael Lewis, his level and his stages presumably would not be, he did it at Ball State, so he should do it at Indiana. It would be similar, like an Indiana State, a Cincinnati, a Butler, and then we start talking. And just to wrap up our segment here, I would feel the exact same way about the heartthrob of Indiana right now, Dusty May. They're incredibly fun to watch, and when they're kicking ass, they are, honest to God, a joy to watch play basketball. It's fun. It's fast. We would call it modern because they don't have plotters out there, even though Golden's from Russia and probably ripping shots every time out just to stay faithful to his native motherland.
Slavic bigs are not American bigs. Done. It's a whole different species of animal. They are no. I mean, 6'10", you want to ski at the end of that name.
Right.
Apologies to our Muscovite listeners on the X's and Joe's podcast.
That's right.
Get out of Ukraine.
But somebody like Dusty May, presumably that next stop is that next chance to be in the real proving ground, that Clemson, Ole Miss, Kansas State, that Power 5 program who has had some really good bits and pieces in their history, but aren't a mainstay of what we would call high-end college basketball jobs. That doesn't mean I wouldn't want him to be Indiana's coach in 6, 7, 8, 10 years. But I think realistically, you can step back and be like, that his level in his next stop is one of those, not Indiana, Kentucky, North Carolina, programs of that, what I would consider that size and caliber with those resources.
So it's like, so you think it's like baseball where you can't be a single A player and start for the Yankees the next day?
Right.
Usually the case. And I also think part of this also comes down to, when I'm looking at head coaching candidates anymore, I'm looking, and I'm also one that would say there are times I look at even assistant coaches on D1 staffs and think maybe they need to be ranked up a little bit because of their contacts.
Sure.
So much of this game is not just understanding X's and O's and understanding how to deploy offense and understanding how all that works. It's, can you accumulate talent? Can you develop a plan? Can you run a program? All of those elements that get factors in. And Dusty May clearly can do a lot of those things, but you sent him to a K-State for a while. Looks like Micah Shrewsbury did. He went to Penn State, now he's at Notre Dame. He's now able to rank up the sort of kids that he's talking to. He gets to, and now directors who would put basketball directors of big programs who had him 5th on the call sheet or 10th on the call sheet when he was at Penn State, now have him at 5th. He now ranks up because of where he's coaching, and that gives him more experience in more of those areas. So that prestige factor makes a big difference. And when we come back from the next break, we're going to talk about how those programs, not just their prestige, their image, their style, their performance, their resources, how they impact who they recruit, and also how they recruit those types of players.
And welcome back to the X's and Joe's podcast. I'm Mike Weemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats and our pal Sam Story. So, boys, with March just one leap year day away, let's discuss the banner hanging squads. What, and this is directed directly to you, Sam, what ultimately do you think separates the great programs from the wannabes? Like, we're thinking about, as fans, we can see obviously during the games, like just the flow of play and, whether a team runs fast and slow, but like getting down into a little bit more of the sort of the roster and scouting details. Like what do they look like and what causes teams to be able to access those players in terms, like Bob said, with the style and the type of campus they have? What are those factors that actually allow those teams to get those players that maybe are a little bit more off limits to the other teams?
I think as we kind of piggyback off some of the things we were talking about earlier, I think with where college basketball is now, and a bit how the game has changed, I have found the programs that have multiple wing athletes. Now, we could call this a shooting guard if you want, but multiple guard and wing athletes who can pressure a defense, I think, have a leg up over those that don't. And now, like we were saying, you can uncover these guys from a lot of different avenues. Guy could have started at a small school, blew up, and then went into the portal and ended up in a big school. Could be somebody like Agbaji, who we were talking about, lowly rated, kind of bided his time in Kansas, then started crushing people. So something I was looking at was the last few years, there's been the Big 12,
Mm-hmm.
there's been the SEC, and there's been the Big 10, and then the ACC has been kind of a mess because their bottom is usually really, really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
So between looking at to me, the Big 10, and I'm sure you guys would agree, we don't have a consistent March winner. And I think a part of that is I don't think the Big 10 has a lot of that dynamism off ball that we would see in the Big 12 of the SEC. So just 4 quick examples of 4 programs that in the last 5 years I've either had a really good run or they've won it or they were just awesome. And like, how did that roster look like? So 2018, 2019 Auburn, they made the Final Four. Jared Harper was just like, he was like Yogi Ferrell on steroids. He was maybe a little quicker, a little stronger, and he had just these hops. A lot of times Auburn that year was playing Harper. Here, I'll just give you the sizes of what was kind of their best lineup. 5'11", 6'3", 6'4", 6'7", and 6'7".
Mm-hmm.
Or 6'7" and 6'8". That year they had a great center, Chuma Okeke, who tore his knee in the NCAA tournament. If you want to talk about speed in modern, the guys trotting out there with 3 guys who were 6'4" or less. They finished 6th in offense, 155th in pace, but they were 43% of their points on the year came from 3.
Okay.
So we'll fast forward 2021, 2022 Kansas, national champions. DeJuan Harris, who a lot of people know is still there, one of the best defensive guards in college basketball. But then they had Agbaji, Christian Braun, who was maybe a half-inch taller, and then Jalen Wilson, who last year they had Wilson and Kevin McCullough, who were very similar, like 6'8", I guess what we'd call like a modern 4, but definitely a drive first kind of guy. And then probably the great thing about him is, they had a post presence, David McCormick. He didn't get the ball a lot. He was in there, a bit like Jared Jeffrey's NBA career. He was in there to guard everybody. And then when he did get it down there, he's going to flush it. They were 6th in offense as well. When I say offense, I mean Ken Palm adjusted offense. 6th in offense, 6th in pace. They were going. But probably the interesting thing, 55% of their points were on 2s. But as you go through those player profiles, Harris, Agbaji, Braun, Wilson, so much driving the basketball. All of them had a huge number of 2s compared to 3s. They really were the Romeo Langford. They really wanted to drive the basketball before they had given thoughts to launching one. 2021, 2022, Kentucky, the same year, but Kentucky decided, as the Big 10 is going to sign with Peacock, we're going to lose to the Peacocks. But that Kentucky team, another, again, 5'9", 6'3", 6'5", former Hoosier, Keon Brooks, of course, 6'7", and then Shibwe, who was 6'9", but is, recall, played like he was 8'4".
Right.
But again, that team, 5th in offense, 60.9% of their offense was 2s. But again, drivers. Like Kellen Grady wanted to shoot 3s. Keon Brooks did not want to shoot a 3. Ty Washington and Severe Willer wanted to get to the basket. And then Shibwe obviously only shot 2s. And then the last thing, and then we can kind of tie this all together, 2020, 2021 Baylor, national champions. Davion Mitchell, 6'2", Jared Butler, 6'3", Flagler, 6'3", Mark Vitale, 6'5", even though he's built like Rambo. Maceo Teague, 6'4", and then they had either Tamba or Chamu Chachua in the post, who was a traditional low post kind of guy. 2nd in offense,
Number one in 3-point percentage.
49% of their points from two, but they had literally the perfect balance because they led all of Division One at the time, 361 teams in 3-point percentage. So, as you're talking about what does a great program look like? And to me, it is pace and space, like modern, high-level winning. It doesn't have a bunch of guys who are 7 foot tall. If it had to have a bunch of guys who are 5'8", it would theoretically be more possible. But you basically have, and we're kind of scrapping old ideas on point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward. It's more lead guard, playmaker who can make things happen and pressure a defense, and then some sort of combination of two guys off ball, regardless of height, that can also move a defense because they can get to the rim. And, varying levels of a 5-man, where you had David McCormick, who didn't get the ball a lot, but then Shibwe, who got it quite a bit. But essentially a really good winning March program. They have those. This goes back to one of the first things we talked about was they have those off-ball guys that can either move a defense or pressure one because they can get to the rim. Because as Dean Smith said a long time ago, the greatest ever offense is the free throw line. And like if you watch some of those Auburn clips, when Jared Harper would drive it, it'd be like Eric Gordon. It's like, well, yeah, I fouled him.
Yeah. Well, and Sam, I love the fact you brought up Dean Smith because, I brought up the Bible before, the sacred text of multiple offenses and defenses. The Pentateuch of basketball coaching in my, and with a forward by Bob Knight. So it's like, you get the whole shooting match on this piece of literary masterpiece. But it has a whole bunch of offenses in there that, are dated in the 70s and 80s. You have concepts in there. But a lot of the problem, I think, when you talk to regular people who grew up watching the game in that era, even through the 80s, even the early 90s, before you got the 35-second now the 30-second shot clock, people just don't understand that you don't need massive amounts of movement and complexities in offense to move a defense now. In fact, that's where the dribble penetration comes into play. You have to have dribble penetration because you don't have the time to run 8 back screens and 3 reversals to get the ball inside through passing. Plus, I think that there's always a discrimination against guards for a long time that, we don't really want you dribbling the ball. That's showy, that's flashy. It permeated through the game up until probably, again, the early to mid-90s. Really, I think Mike's always said this with Duke, that it was probably Mike Krzyzewski who kind of started the dribble drive construct, and Calipari perfected it. But a lot of it came down to defense when they started doing more help side, more double, basically doing that, moving defense to stop things. Now you have, I call them help dilemmas. We call them help dilemmas, where it's like, okay, this guy's driving. His job is to beat the first guy. Sometimes he needs a ball screen. Sometimes he attacks a closeout. Just depends on the player, depends on the situation. Now, how does the defense stop that person from getting to the rim? Because you don't want to see what you see sometimes in games where it's like the defense parts like the Red Sea and the guy's hanging off the rim. And now his Nikes are on your eyebrows while you're doing this. You gotta, so now at that point, you've got these guys moving, and are you going to take the guy off the big and let the guy throw the dump off for the lob? Or are you going to take the guy out there and get the ball to the wing or to the corner for the 3-point shot? Which is, again, where it goes down to the old "we need shooters" cry, which drives us all bonkers because you can be a shooter, that's great, but if you're just a shooter, then you're not creating a help dilemma. They're going to they're going to basically take you off. And if you're a 40% shooter here on the wing and you got a 20% shooter on the corner, you're getting covered in that because the scout's going to tell that team to do it. And Division I high major teams, good ones, are going to cover that, especially in an NCAA tournament when they're sinking at the highest possible level because they're playing basketball at a high level. What's better is, instead of "we need shooters," we need multi-tool players who can hit 3-point shots. Would you rather have a guy that hits 40% or 4 guys who hit 35 and a guy that hits 30 on the floor? I take the second one over the first one every day of the week and twice on Sundays. Because I think what people also forget is that they're between 35% and 40% on the 3-point as aggregated statistics. This kid's a 40% shooter. Well, that's only 5 additional 3-pointers in 100 shots. When did he hit them? When did he hit them? And the other question becomes, it's not just looking at the aggregated stat, but it's like sometimes a kid may go 0 for 4, and sometimes a kid may go 4 for 6. And if he's going 0 for 4 in an 8-man rotation, that may be his day to kind of sit on the bench and drink some Gatorade and cheer his teammates on, wave the towel, while the other guy, who may go 4 for 6 that day, who went 0 for 4 the last time, goes in and replaces him, which is where you have to have a little bit of a bench and a little bit of depth in order to be competitive at this level.
There are parallels to what you're saying to just within like our own Indiana fandom, because the last few years we saw Sasha Stefanovic bomb it for Purdue. So Matt Ross' first 2 years where he played, I think he was 37. I want to say it was 37.2 and 37.5% from three, which is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
I should say it's good. The year he had Zeller, 52.5, which seems just impossible to believe. So he didn't really change. He was a pretty one-dimensional offensive player. His value skyrocketed because you started having a wing player in Oladipo who could drive it, and then they had a post presence.
Mm-hmm.
Sasha Stefanovic, I believe his best year shooting at Purdue, just in terms of raw three-point percentage, was his freshman year. That was also his worst offensive rating.
Mm-hmm.
When they had Ivy and he had developed a shot fake a little more, were the 2 years he had the highest offensive rating. The standstill shooter on his own doesn't bring a ton of value. But when you can have one of those guys paired with a slasher or two, now it becomes the kind of offense. And Florida did it very differently with Billy Donovan because they had that guy, Lee Humphrey,
Mm-hmm.
who a one-man napalm thrower. But Corey Brewer, when he got the ball, it was like, I'm going to the basket.
Mm-hmm.
And they had Horford and Joakim Noah, and it was like, okay, those two guys are built like California redwoods, and we've got to be able to somehow stop them. And then if Brewer drove it, there was big issues. So Lee Humphrey on his own was whatever. But when those guys are paired with better athletes as teammates, then their own value can just skyrocket. And that's where when people say, we need shooters, I'm like, not as much as we need setup men. Yeah. We need guys to set them up, and that happens when a guy can pass his hand and draw fouls.
Yeah, it's funny. Like Sam, I think when we first started texting each other years ago, I think that was like one of the first topics I believe we discussed was the value of shooter slashers versus just shooters or just slashers. And so I think, if the FBI looked at the text messages that you and I sent to each other over the years, they would probably think we're starting like some kind of sectarian movement to just get as many shooters and slashers into Indiana basketball as possible. Yeah, you're right. I mean, you just look at college basketball, the comparison, again, looking at the stuff that I do with the sweet spot and the rankings and all that, put all that aside. Look at the scouting reports on the teams and just ask yourself, which of these teams has the most number of guys that you can't leave open from three and you can't close out too hard when they are open for three? Because they're just going to be like the moment you take one step too far on the closeout, they're hanging on the rim, less than a second later, or they're at the foul line. And when people ask me, well, what's your ideal team? Like, you just, what's the example that the kind of team that you think works and you'd like to see your favorite team be like? And I would say Baylor 2021 because it's an accessible lineup. It's not like they're just loaded with 5 stars. They're all, it's a mix of accessible sweet spot, 30 to 80 kids mixed with some really high end transfers and with, right amount of experience, juniors and seniors, and four guys that can basically shoot and drive at the same time. Not in perfect balance. Some guys are a little bit better shooters, some guys a little bit better drivers, some guys a little bit stronger and skinnier than others. But if you watch that championship game, and the Gonzaga team that year was really good.
They were.
Baylor embarrassed them. There were times where that offense was just clicking so much and that Mark Few just had no answer. It's like, I can't cover these guys. There's too spread out. The moment any one of my guys gets one step out of the way, they're driving right by them. And we had to commit. And like Bob says, you create those dilemmas. We have to commit other guys, and suddenly the ball's getting kicked. And someone who's, shoots a high percentage even when covered is now going to be wide open. It's going to shoot an even higher percentage now. And so the thing about it is that makes it so alluring is that it's so easy once you have those guys. You watch some of those teams play, they're not running very complex stuff. It's like you think about how much conversation, like we as IU fans, just trying to dig through the potential types of systems you would run. Oh, if we could just run this, and we just sent this many pin downs. If we just had 7 pin downs and the guys, running around, then we'll move into a mover blocker, and then the final, you watch some of these better teams, they don't have to do anything close to that because, again, they get the spread going, and it's just very easy movement. Once they have those kind of advantages, it's very tough to contain that. And it becomes almost just like, it's like watching a hockey team on power play. Everyone kind of knows, okay, that guy commits, I kick over here. That guy pushes in, he kicks over the open guy. So it's it's the combination of ease of use and also functionality, because obviously so many of the best teams now are doing that, and it's obviously working.
Well, and it's why when you look at certain websites that give break down how teams are scoring, how many teams are now pushing that 20% mark in transition? How many of their basket points are coming from that 15 to 20% in transition baskets? Mike, I think you brought up a great, you really brought up a great point when you start talking about that repetitiveness, because if you're starting your offense at 23 seconds, like a lot of Big Ten teams do, and one that we love in particular does more frequently this year than we've seen in the past, and then you're trying to pound the ball into the post, reversing to the post, trying to get it there, you're bleeding off a huge amount of time, and you're really not getting the ball where you want it to go to the people you want it to go to. And that's the other thing is that, there are some good passing bigs. I mean, Zach Edey's a good passing big. Trace Jackson Davis and Trevion Williams were excellent passing bigs. I think Luka Garza was pretty good at getting the ball where he needed to get it. Yeah. But then you go into March, and that's just not the case where you just have where you have that any longer. And another thought as I kind of think about this, we start talking about the standalone shooter, and I remember watching Romeo Langford play at New Albany, and the whole thing when he's a great 3-point shooter. No, he'll be adequate. He'll be good, and he may not be good this first year, but he will develop a shot. Romeo Langford doesn't have to stand there and shoot threes. His job is to basically get 3 defenders on him and then pick Sean East or another kid from New Albany who'll hit 45% and will have like all day to shoot the ball. Like by the time the defender gets there, Grubhub beats him to the point. So it's like that's where when you look at the rankings also, you say, well, where are the shooters at in the rankings? Where are the guys that can hit shots in the rankings? A lot of times they're further down the list. And they're further down the list because, I think Sam kicked off with this and said it best. It's like, you need 3-tool guys. It's not just good enough to have a guy that can, move off the ball well and get shots. They need to have more than one thing to do because they are incredibly easy to guard.
Yeah, Mike, the perfect team, just stealing our own Hoosiers here, would be 4 Langfords and 4 Eric Gordons, because the 4 Langfords would drive it every time and foul the opposition out. Yeah. And then the Gordon would stretch a defense, then drive it every time to foul out the walk-ons. So we get we get Mike Santa on the floor for the opposition.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And getting that, I don't know what NIL require to get that team, but I'm sure someone out there's got the cash for it. So
Yeah, well, we just got to see where NVIDIA goes because they can afford all of it if we own enough of it.
yeah.
So, Mike, did we get any questions from anybody in our version of? I don't want to call it the chat mob because that's an AC thing. What do we want to call this? Like the chat the gallery, the gallery. Do we want to call it the
yeah? Yeah. I had a few comments and questions before we wrap up.
By the way,
I definitely want to make sure that we handle this.
By the way, hi Tony, we see you.
Yes, we do see you, Tony.
We know where to find you for later things.
One of the questions that did come in from David was about Mackenzie Mbako. And, I guess we're on the topic of rankings. He asked, what contributed to Mbako's top 10 ranking? He said he seems like a nice player, but he suggesting that maybe that ranking of 10 seems a tad high.
He looks the part. That's my kick. He looks the part, and he's got a great form. He's got a great touch on his shot, and he has improved greatly as a Hoosier. But I'm just going to leave it there and then let Sam go, and Mike, you too. But that's my first instinct. He looks the part.
I think, as we talked earlier about, maybe characteristics coaches look for between size, skill, and athleticism. Size is there. He's very well built. Skill, he clearly has a defined skill. Just the form itself is very naturally clean. He started 21 for 21 or 22 of 22 from the free throw line. The mechanics are simple. I think one thing that maybe wasn't as known or understood was he's really not a great athlete. He hasn't had a lot of those drives where it looked like he was gaining ground. And by that, I mean he was getting to the rim quicker than the defensive player was keeping up with him.
Right.
He's had some good drives this year. He tried to have one last night almost immediately as the game started. But I'm not going to say it looks like he's laboring. It just seems there's not a natural foot speed that he possesses that is allowing him to kind of have his left shoulder on the backside of the defender. It's not a shot fake and a dribble and the guys behind him. He's really been even with the defensive player a lot. So I'm not going to say he's a bad athlete. I think I would say I don't think he's very fleet of foot. And I think, if he harbors a long professional career, basically two things are going to have to occur. He's going to have to get better with his handle so he can get into his drive quicker. And then he just got to play more. He needs to play a lot more games so his defensive acumen can ratchet up because there's only so much, there's different types of learners, but there's only so much you can really learn in a film session or in practice. He needs to play a lot of games. But obviously the stroke and the size are great.
Sam, would you say that he probably played a lot of zone defense when he was in high school?
I could see him as a guy that would be number one on Syracuse's board. Yeah.
The middle of it to protect him offensively. I mean, the greatest annoyance of coaches.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I'd back up Sam's scout on Mbako. He's the only thing I would add. I know he had some really good games in front of the right people, and that counts a lot. So. And also there is a certain kind of bias that I think the rankers have, at least what I notice, for guys that shoot really accurately who are over like 6'5".
Right.
I mean, it's almost like you can see a guy that, let's say, shoots, like you take two players, they shoot exactly the same. One guy's like 6'3", they'll rank him down at 80 or something like that. Add 2 inches to that same, or the guy that's next to him shoots exactly the same. He's 2 or 3 inches taller, or they could put him in 15 or 10.
Sure.
And it's just like a bias, despite the fact that, as Sam says, he doesn't really have the kind of burst that you might expect for someone that's at that level. And that's always kind of the problem with rankings. Again, it's like rankings are great aggregately, individually. One of the problems is that player skills are not uniform. if you're a kid that's ranked 50th, that doesn't mean you're 50th at every single facet of your game. You might be the 10th best shooter, but like the 90th best defender. So player skills are just kind of all over the place. So the ranking is kind of generically put kind of an aggregation or an averaging out of what your assessed value is. So yeah, with someone like Mbako, you're going to have obviously great shooting, but obviously he doesn't have the kind of athleticism that matches the shooting. So again, that's why you'll see guys really, especially as freshmen, 5 stars can have like very high and lows compared to each other, even though they were in the same McDonald's All-American class.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else out there, Mike?
Not really. No, that was
Okay.
that was the main question that was asked.
So, as we wrap up here, and I kind of phrase it as the quantity theory of money for Mike, because I know he would love it when I throw out a Friedman reference. just at this point in time, as to how how the amount of money in a marketplace impacts price, as well as what I called it the free movement of human assets, or basically free agency in this area. And now an unregulated marketplace. What are we looking at here as this moves forward? Because I think that we definitely touched on it, but there's a lot of this as we kind of go through the next, I don't know. Obviously, for IU fans, watching March and April very carefully. Whom are we looking at? Because clearly this program needs some help. Who and where are guys, exits and entrances sort of things. And then the low fruit of that short recruitment that some people seem to just love. Where do we think this is going?
I'll give it a crack. Well, first of all, what does Indiana need for next year? A lot. I forecast they'll have, well, they have eligibility, right? Xavier Johnson, Anthony Walker are done with college basketball.
Yep.
I'm sure
Where's
Clell
going pro?
will go pro, as he should. Trey Galloway, he told me he'd be back in Indiana. I expect him back in Indiana, but nothing is certain. They're just going to need a lot of guys. I forecast some staff changes. That's not referencing the head coach because we're not going to worry about that tonight. I just think they'll be very, very different. But I think what they need more than anything is they just need way more punch at guard. Because Trey Galloway cannot play 40 minutes a night and tag the opponent's best guard, and then also be asked to expend whatever energy he has to then go play offense. Seems like the only third thing the staff hasn't asked him every night is to cure cancer. But they need way more punch in the backcourt because A, they need Trey to rest, and 2, they need different options. And as Kalel leaves and Derek Queen is going to Maryland, I think it stands to reason they could want to pick up another 5. And then there'll just be, a general list of questions on like player returns. Like Caleb Banks and Caleb Banks especially has played very little in the last 2 months.
As a sophomore, I want to note as a sophomore.
CJ Gunn has played more than him, but also not a lot. And then, the question we just had about Mackenzie Mbako is, if I were forecasting what I would think is best for his own career, like selfishly, yeah, I'd like him back in Indiana. I like watching him play. But what I think he needs the most are in-game repetitions. Now, whether that's in the G League, an NBA team picks him up, or he's bouncing around Europe, he needs to play basketball games. And if he plays 34 at Indiana next year, but 8 of them are against the Alcorn States of the world, I mean, that's not going to help him as much for him trying to get to wherever he wants to go as it would playing professionally somewhere. So they need a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd second Sam's assessment. I think all the conversations I've had this year have been very, I guess, guard centric, and it's IU is really one of the most interesting teams that, because I do look at college basketball sort of up and down in terms of the rosters, the productivity, across different parts of every team between guards, forwards, centers, and IU is really one of the most unbalanced teams in terms of their productivity. And unbalanced teams, like unless you have like a Zach Edey or some complete colossus down low, it's very difficult to win in modern basketball with that much productivity just sort of centered down literally at the 5 and 4 position. So yeah, offensive punch in the backcourt, speed in the backcourt, the ability to again get defenses, switching and help dilemmas, and a little bit of shooting, and just overall just scoring to basically help open up a little bit more space for the guys like Malik Renew. Because I think we've seen this year that when Renew gets matched up one-on-one with space, he's very difficult to handle. But when he's in a crowd, he's much different. He's just not nearly as effective.
And you got to get this kid some help. And I'm just going to kind of throw out, my way. I'm going to kind of look at this a little differently with, as the NCAA retrenches, questions that we've had as to what's ethical behavior versus versus improper activities, the line is definitively blurred, if not no longer existent. And I'm not saying this I'm not using the word cheating. What I'm basically saying is what we've done in Indiana in the last few years has been phenomenal in creating a powerful NIL system for our student athletes. And the real question for us now is, how do we leverage it and utilize it? And I think we've talked about this enough on the show. We're going to keep talking about it, and we're going to keep looking at this as other teams kind of look at the programs, and programs are doing what they're doing with with the top 5-star type players versus the 4-star type players. How we can better leverage our assets in this sort of unregulated marketplace of the NCAA. That if you can find the system that, find those types of players that can get you into that sweet spot, of which IU doesn't really have anybody in there right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, our guys are the sweet spot, and then our guys are kind of.
Our guys are all kind of. It's a nice.
All around it.
There's a upside down rainbow, or a trough, for lack of a better term, that's there.
Yeah.
We have to kind of look at this from a standpoint that, and also looking at it from a standpoint that as the future continues, when you start looking at head coaching candidates, not being as unforgiving as we've been in the past. There we go. I thought we broke Sam for a minute there.
He's back.
But no, I mean, when we retrenching, not having the same rules, regulations, or even just having the same sort of, what do we call it, almost bias against certain guys who were dirty or an SOB or whatever you want to call them, you got to get, as you start looking at how you assemble coaching staffs, how you get people in, you need guys who are able to compete in the modern landscape. And you need, and luckily I think our athletic department can finally bury the ghost of Phil Dickens and be done with this. Because I mean, I get it. I get why when we were all there, we had to do things a certain way because people had long memories. And Herman B. Wells ended his academic career, basically, or ended his presidency in Indiana because of the Phil Dickens incident. So I understand why there was a hesitancy on Indiana University's part to we're going to be well on the right side of the regulations. But if everyone's going 75, 80, and there's no cops on the road, you don't go 110, but you definitely want to keep up with traffic. And you need a car and drivers that can do it.
Yeah.
It's a great way to say it.
Yep. That's a good way to close us down.
Especially
Sam,
the driver's part, most important part.
Yeah.
It is. It really is. It really is.
All about drivers.
Wow. You got to drive it.
Yeah, too long, didn't read. get drivers. That's this episode.
Sam, we always love it when we spend 90 minutes with you, and we always love it when we talk to you. And I say that, we're really appreciative of you giving us some time here and hanging out with us, and actually making your debut on a podcast with us.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, but obviously think very highly of, well, a lot of what you do, but the way you look at the sport, because it really is always changing. And both of you with your background, it's always easy to parlay off of each other. So thank you guys for having me, and the warm introduction. Don't worry, the check's in the mail.
Okay. We
Thank you,
it.
and again, thank you for everything. You're just a great dude, and we love you. Yeah. I'm going to say thanks to Bob Thompson for the music that you hear on the show and the sound that captures us so well, as well as the designs from John Ringer of ringdesign.com. We appreciate all that you've done for us as well.
Absolutely. And next episode 7, titled "We Didn't See That Coming and Some Things We Did." How things are basically shaping up at the end of the regular season in college basketball. So, this endless conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including Assembly Call, Doing the Work, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and backhomenetwork.com. Until next time, I'm Mike Weemuth.
I'm Bob Motes.
Have a good one, everyone. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, boys.